The start of the school year for pretty much all of us at this point by the last week of August. The start of the school year is always an exciting time, at least for me personally. In addition to my involvement in a youth ministry like this, I'm also in a graduate program, which means that my life is pretty connected to the academic calendar. So August and September, they're always new, they're always exciting, they're always kind of busy months. And my guess is that for most of us in the room, you could say something similar, that the start of a new school year is at the very least, it's a new time and it's a busy time, though it might not be an exciting time. And I'm also gonna assume that for most of us in the room, you're hoping that this year goes well, that this new school year goes even better than last year went. Even if last year was good overall, you still probably want this year to go better. If you play a sport, you want to be better at your sport, or you also want your team to be better at your sport. Ideally, your grades get better, your classes get better, your teachers get better, maybe even your school lunch, it all gets better. And if you're in any extracurricular activity, you want that to go well. And for most of us in the room, those aren't even the most important things. The most important things are going to kind of fall in the more serious category. If you could snap your fingers right now and have any area of your life get better, you're probably going to say, or some of us are probably going to say, hey, I would really like some of my relationships to get better. Family relationships, they're broken, they're chaotic, it's not a lot of fun right now. Or you got some friendships, or you're like friendships that are hanging on by a thread and you're hoping that those get better. Maybe you are in a relationship, you do have a boyfriend, you have a girlfriend, and you just want that stuff to get better. Or maybe if you were even kind of a little vulnerable, and you don't got to say this out loud, but if you're just thinking about yourself and you're thinking about your own health, your own happiness, there might be a part of you that goes, hey, you know what? I would love over the next year, over my junior year of high school or whatever, I would love to be less anxious. I would love to have more peace. I would love for my life to just have less stress. I would like to not be sad all the time, and I would actually like to be happy. Or for those of us who are Christians, you would say that you want your relationship with God to get better, that you actually want to grow in your faith, whatever that means or whatever that looks like for you, whether it's I want to read my Bible more, I want to be more disciplined, I want to show up to church on time and, better, whatever that looks like for you. We all might have different areas of focus or kind of different specific areas in our life, but the majority of us, we all want our life to get better. And I would venture to say that Jesus wants the same thing for us as well. I don't know how you got introduced to Jesus, but I know that for some of us, when we hear the message of Jesus or when we hear things about God, sometimes a lot of the messaging about God can concern the afterlife. So you hear stories, or you hear messages like, hey, believe in Jesus and you go to heaven when you die, or don't believe in Jesus and you go to hell when you die. I can see that in the Bible, and I understand why that's important. But I think we always got to be careful that we don't take our relationship with God and we put it only in the section of the afterlife. Because when we do that, we run the risk of missing out on, quite frankly, our best version of life, of like daily life. There's a famous Bible verse from John chapter 10, verse 10, where Jesus says that the reason he showed up on planet Earth was to show people and to give people a version of life that he described, or some translators describe as abundant. That literally way better than any other worldview, any other religion, any other philosophy or ideology. Jesus is kind of, one of his mission statements is, hey, I showed up so that I could show people what the best version of life looks like, and so that I could help them experience that too. And there's a number of teachings of Jesus that we could look at and go, okay, Jesus, hey, can you show me what it looks like to live abundant life, to live an abundant life, or maybe even just a better life? But there's one section of Jesus' teaching in particular that is kind of a collection of his greatest hits, if you will. And it talks a lot, or it has a lot of implications for us living our best version of life. And as you can see on 2 out of the 3 screens behind me, it is the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is the collection of teachings that we find in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. It is one of Jesus' most famous teachings, and it's what we're going to study for the next 10 weeks. There's one New Testament scholar that I read that he kind of just notes that Jesus' ideas in the Sermon on the Mount, they pop up at a unique time in human history. And it's very clear that Jesus is in conversation with at least two different worldviews in his Sermon on the Mount, at least two worldviews. One worldview, the one most of us are going to be a little bit more familiar with, is he's in conversation with first century Judaism. So when you read your Old Testament, you can kind of read the historical narrative, and then you get to Jesus. Jesus is speaking to Jewish people about how to understand their Jewish law and their Jewish history. He's in conversations about, hey, you guys all understand the Old Testament this way. I'm going to show you what God really meant by it and how we're really supposed to live it out. But the other worldview that he's in dialogue with is what many people refer to as Greco-Roman philosophy. You don't need to remember that term. But if you think of writers or philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, people who spent a lot of time thinking about, hey, what is the best way for someone to live life? Jesus is also in conversation with those worldviews. So the Sermon on the Mount is kind of Jesus' vision for, hey, here is the best way for a human being to live. Oh, and by the way, it's the way that God has designed humans to live from the beginning. So as we consider the start of a new school year, well aware that most of us in the room are looking at our lives and going, hey, there's a couple areas that I would like to get better. Okay, there's a couple areas that I would like to see improvement. We thought, what better place to start than the Sermon on the Mount? However, this morning, I don't want to start where the sermon starts. I want to start where the sermon ends. Because the way Jesus ends the Sermon on the Mount is so important and it's so critical for how we understand the rest of the sermon that if you miss it, you can seriously miss out. You see, the sermon, it covers topics like anger and cheating on people, broken relationships. It covers things like how to treat people who have wronged you and hurt you, how to be less anxious. But if you don't follow Jesus' advice at the end of the sermon, nothing else in the sermon is going to make your life any better. The ending provides a bit of a key for how to unlock the whole thing. And I want to show you it. This is how Jesus ends what many think of as the greatest speech in human history. We'll go Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Now, quick note, the Greek word that Matthew used that gets translated as practice is the word poiao, which sounds very similar to pollo for my Hispanic brothers and sisters, but it's a very different meaning, okay? The Greek word, it shows up around 22 times in the Sermon on the Mount, but it gets translated into English in a variety of ways. Sometimes you can translate that word to mean to practice, other times to do or to make or to produce. It's definitely an action verb, and it's a very important thread that runs throughout the sermon. Over and over again, we see Jesus define his disciples, the people who follow him, as people who are taking action, as people who are taking his words and then putting them into practice in their own lives. And right here, Jesus is saying that when we hear his words and when we put them into practice, we are like a wise man who built our house on the rock, on a solid foundation, which might sound strange, but we'll keep on reading. Next verse, he says, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. So the people who listen to the words of Jesus and put them into practice, he says they're wise. And when they face the storms of life, he says they're going to be able to handle difficult seasons. Challenging circumstances are not going to get the best of these people, and they're not going to cause them to come crashing down because they are living the way that Jesus instructs. And then here's the last part, two more verses 26 to 27. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice, it's not underlined in the original. I just did that. It's like a foolish man who built his house on sand, not a solid foundation. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Fell with a great crash. That is how Jesus ends what is considered by many people his most famous teaching of all time. It's kind of a downer. It doesn't really end like a pep talk. If I ended all my sermons by saying, hey, everything I just said today, go and do it, and if you don't, your life is going to crash. And that's it. And I just walk off stage. I don't pray or anything. Some of you might think that's cool or funny, but most of us would be like, that was kind of a downer. That wasn't encouraging. Why? And yet that's what Jesus does. He actually says that here is what causes people to crumble under pressure. Here's what causes people to make bad decisions in one moment that they end up regretting later on. It happens when they hear the teachings of Jesus, but they don't do anything about it. It's when they know his teachings on forgiveness or honesty, but they choose to live a different way. It's when they know his wisdom on relationships and temptation, but they still do what they want to do anyways. And to be very clear, I am not saying that God actively punishes people who disobey him. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that people who hear his teachings and don't put them into practice, they do not experience the abundant life that he has on offer. And for those of us who call ourselves Christians, we believe the Bible, we trust the Bible, it is very easy for us to fall into the trap of thinking that because I know the truth, because I agree with the truth, I'm also living the truth. That's just not the case. As a matter of fact, one of Jesus's main critiques of the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his day and age, was that they believed all the right stuff, but they didn't live the right way. You can read Matthew chapter 23 on your own time. It's cool that you believe in God. It's cool that you think the Bible is the word of God, but Jesus does not invite us to just agree with a set of ideas. He invites us to follow him, which means living like him. And the reason this matters so much for a community like ours that's made up of middle and high school students is because all the sociological data out there, at least on a national scale, basically suggests that after high school, about 2/3 of this room will stop being involved in a church and will stop affiliating with the Christian faith. That's what kind of the national averages are, at least to my understanding of the most recent data. In my experience here at Cottonwood, the attrition rate is not that high, but I definitely have seen young adults who grow up in church, they go to kids ministry, they grow up in a student ministry, and then they graduate and they no longer have to attend. And for a variety of factors, they end up dropping out of church and no longer associating or affiliating with the Christian faith. And a lot of times researchers will say things like, oh, young people are leaving the church or they're leaving the faith. You have young people who are denouncing their Christianity. And if I could just speak from my own observation, this is not a national study that I've conducted. This is my own observation of our local community. A lot of times, I do wonder whether or not young people who reach kind of young adulthood and then no longer affiliate with the church or with faith, I do wonder how many of them were even Christians to begin with. Like, they were church attenders for sure. And maybe they even believed in God. They believed that he existed. Maybe they even trusted the Bible because that's what their parents trusted. And they said, hey, that's the word of God and that teaches us about all things. And they were like, cool, I'm on board with it. But in a lot of instances, they never actually developed their own personal relationship with Jesus. And many times the reason for that, the reason is because they heard all the stories and they agreed with most of the ideas, but they just never did anything. They never really tried to live with Jesus and like Jesus. They never developed a prayer life. They never confessed sin. They never took Jesus's advice on how to engage in relationships or conflict resolution. They heard all the lessons, but they never lived the life. And Jesus's conclusion to his Sermon on the Mount, all about how to experience the best version of life, is don't make the same mistake. Don't just learn all the lessons and then live your own life. Because part of what it means to trust him is to try. To actually try to do the things that Jesus told us to do. And the reason that I wanted to start the series with the end of the sermon is because I really don't want us to waste the next couple of months listening to sermons that are meant to be lived. And so for the next 2 months, and honestly, this is just good practice if you are a Christian and you're going to engage in church gatherings like this on a regular basis, I want you to please keep this statement in the front of your mind. We'll throw it on the screens. Don't just listen to learn, but learn to live. Don't just listen to learn, but learn to live. Don't just listen to sermons to learn more about the Bible or learn more about God. That's cool. But learn from sermons how to live like Jesus. Now, this takes way more focus and intentionality on your part as a listener because it shifts the goal from sitting through something and just listening to actually learning. If you've ever heard a teacher in the middle of class say something like, hey, this part is going to be on the test, you pay attention differently. You focus a lot more because you know you're going to need that information for later. You move from listening to learning. And that's kind of the spirit that I'm recommending you bring to sermons, messages, teachings in church gatherings. Not just as a passive observer, but as someone who is trying to learn information that they're going to need later. This could look like having some questions in the back of your mind as you engage with messages, either during or after. Questions like, God, is there anything that you were asking me to do in response to this? Are there people in my life who I should talk to about this message? Does this challenge my perspective in any way? Do I need to change any of my attitudes, my actions, or both? Whatever it looks like for you, this is what Jesus is inviting us into. Not just a life of listening to learn, but of learning to live with him and learning to live like him. If we do that, I am confident that our lives will get better. But that won't even be the best part. The best part would actually be the kind of community that we become. I don't know if you've noticed this when you look around society or culture, but we need more people who don't just agree with Jesus, but they actually act like him. We need more people who can show the world that there is a different way to live. There is a way to be less anxious and more peaceful, less greedy and more generous, less judgmental and more compassionate, less focused on just raising our voice about issues and actually intentional about doing something to help people. And if we can make the small decision where we show up here on Sunday mornings and we say, I'm not going to just listen to learn, but I'm going to learn how to live. I'm going to take the stuff that Jesus talked about and I'm going to figure out how to live it out. I have to wonder what God can do with a community of young people who are committed to that way of living. It's one of the reasons that we just started our small group season on Wednesday nights. Our groups, getting in groups with other people, give us the opportunity to do exactly this. To get together and to discuss with one another, hey, how are you following Jesus? How are you living out his instructions about anger or lust or loving people who have hurt us? How are you doing it? How can we inspire one another to follow him that much better? For some of us, your next step in following Jesus might be to no longer follow him alone, but to do it in a group. Some people have made the decision to get baptized today. They are taking their next step. And if you've never made that decision, you are more than welcome to make it today. Whenever they do baptisms, they always have extra clothes and towels for anybody who wants to make a decision right then and there. Or you can wait till next month. And if you've never participated in baptism, you can make the step of making a public declaration about your faith that lets your faith community and anyone else who knows you know, I am following Jesus and I associate with his death, burial, and resurrection. Whatever it is, I promise you that you're going to have opportunities throughout this series to not just learn things, but to live them out. To live out your response to the person who loves you, created you, and gave his life for you. And to end where I started, I really do believe that all of this is a response. That our decision to live our life a certain way for Jesus is a response to the love of Jesus that we've experienced. If you don't know him, if you haven't experienced his goodness, his grace, his mercy, you're going to be way less inclined to listen to anything that anybody says in a church gathering and go, you know what? I'm going to follow that advice even when it's uncomfortable and inconvenient. But for those of us who have discovered it, for those of us who have read the story or heard the story of the God who actually became human and lived the way humans were always supposed to live and showed us what we were created for. And now through his death, burial, and resurrection gives us the ability to participate with him in the redemption of everything. The God who is actually giving all of us a new identity and purpose, and the God who desires to give us a community of faith that we are a part of, where we have friends who we trust and who trust us, and we are all growing together into really this city on a hill, as he describes it, and we'll read next week. If you believe that, and if you trust that, well, then what would it look like for us to go one step further and say, I'm not going to just listen to him to learn things, but I'm going to learn from him how to live. I'm confident that your life will get better, that this school year will get better, and that us as a community, we can paint a different picture to the world. If you will close your eyes, I'm going to pray, and I want to give a time for reflection really fast. And I want to make one note. as much as you can. Try not to fall asleep and just focus in. Because my guess is that there are some people in the room, and when I am talking about responding to the love of Jesus, you would say that you've never experienced that. You've either never heard that story, you've never felt like the offer was there for you, or you just feel like you've never felt any of the goosebumps or the tingles, and therefore responding to God is a difficult thing for you. I just want to let you know, I don't have any creative way to create this experience for you. But I really do believe with all my heart that God knows you, he created you, and he loves you. And if you've never made a decision, like a conscious decision, if faith has always kind of just been something that you've done in your own family, because, hey, we're Christians, we're a Christian family, I just kind of agree with this stuff and go on with it. If you've never made a conscious decision, I want to challenge you to make that decision, but I don't want to like make the decision for you and then just kind of string you along. If you've never made that decision, can I just invite you after service to do the bold, uncomfortable thing of finding a leader in the room and telling them, I want to make a decision for the first time to really follow Jesus, to just commit my life to him. Maybe you've grown up believing in him. Maybe you've grown up and, like I said, this is what my family does. But if you've never made that decision for yourself, I just want to invite you to do it. There's a lot of power in making a decision and in saying, this is my commitment. And for those of us who already have made that commitment, I know that I'm basically teaching a message that says, hey, let's do what he says, but I'm not telling you what to do. That's because we're going to be in the sermon for the next 10 weeks. And I just want to challenge you to engage in our gatherings with a posture and with a heart attitude that says, God, what are you calling me to? Not just what are you trying to say to me? Where's the encouragement? That's going to come for sure. That's just the Holy Spirit's character. But are there things at the start of a new school year that maybe you can experience a little bit more freedom, a little bit more confidence, a little bit more joy on the other side of your obedience? On the other side of you making a decision, God, here's what I'm going to do because I believe you're calling me to do it. And I'm going to trust that you're going to see me through. What might that be for you?